Consider this staggering fact. India spends about $400 million every day on oil imports. It's not really debatable. India's dependence on oil imports is surely, steadily going to increase. So energy security is a pressing issue, it's an urgent issue, and I could add to that list of adjectives. What then are the solutions on offer? Well, you'll get them here on the Energy Dialogue presented by Cairn India. Meet our panel: Vikram Singh Mehta, Chairman, Brookings India; Anil Jain, Member Energy at the Planning Commission; P. Elango, Chief Executive Officer, Cairn India; and Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary and currently Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Gentlemen, great to have you all here with us. We've got a young audience, students who've been thinking about India's energy issues, and I think they're looking for some vision from you. So the first question to each of you is a straight, simple one. Mr. Saran, would you like to go first? What does energy security in the Indian context mean to you?
Energy security in the Indian context means that we are able to ensure adequate, predictable, and increasing supplies of energy resources to enable India to maintain for the next several decades a growth rate of 7 to 8% per annum, which is absolutely essential for meeting our requirements of eradicating poverty and bringing a certain minimum level of development for our increasing population.
Mr. Mehta, when I say energy security to you in the Indian context, what comes to your mind?
4 words come to my mind: availability, access, affordability, and sustainability.
You have the job, Mr. Jain, of looking at the future, planning for the future. Energy security today, what does it mean to you?
I would reflect upon the Integrated Energy Policy Report, which was prepared by the Planning Commission in the year 2007. And that's, I think, the most comprehensive definition of the term energy security was given in that document, which is some kind of ensemble of what has just been offered. And I would just add two probably thoughts to it, that when you talk of energy security, you must bring in the assurance from supply disruptions, from disruptions of all kinds. And precisely 2 disruptions. One is any disruption which might come through price shocks, and any disruption which might come from supply shocks. So if we were to add these 2 terms to what has been offered, that we are energy secure when lifeline quantities or volumes of energy are supplied at affordable prices to all its citizens, I think secure from supply and price disruptions, we are energy secure. That's what I would say.
Mr. Elango, final word to you.
Let me kind of focus on the supply side of the debate. And we take a view that geology doesn't have a geography. Geology is there across the countries. So if you really look at where the energy, more particularly on fossil fuel related energy sources have been found, wherever the investment has gone more. So we take the view that in India, how do we ensure that what is that we have got in terms of natural resources, particularly oil and gas. So to me, energy security is when this country has multiple oil and gas players investing a lot of money and increasing the exploration activities in a significant manner.
Okay, so you've brought the fossil fuel view to bear, but you've all taken me in many different directions. So let me just, keep this again somewhat open-ended. Mr. Saran, if you had to put, a bunch of building blocks to achieve the objective you outlined, what would those building blocks be?
There is no doubt that for the foreseeable future, if you are talking about energy security that is linked to the increased supply of fossil fuels. So it's a question of whether your time frame is the short run, that is the foreseeable future, and equally important, I think it is necessary to look at the longer term. And if I look at the longer term, there is no doubt that for a country like India, I would say even for the world as a whole, you have to make a strategic shift from your current reliance on fossil fuels to an energy future which is essentially based on renewable sources of energy, but also more importantly, you should try and make certain that you make the most efficient use of what you have.
Okay, building blocks, Mr. Mehta. And you know, we can't look too much into the future and ignore the present realities. So try and balance that out. What are the building blocks that you'd put into place for the energy security vision that you've outlined?
Today we are dependent on fossil fuels. Tomorrow, hopefully, we will reduce that dependence, but we have to actually focus on harnessing our fossil fuels because our energy system is dependent on a fossil fuel-based system. We have the 5th largest deposits of coal in the world, yet we import 100 million tons of coal, or we did import this year 100 million tons of coal, and that number is increasing every year. So the first building block is to actually ensure that we increase our production of coal. Second, oil. Now, we are not a Kuwait or a Saudi Arabia. We are not sitting on a vast reservoirs of oil, but we do have 28 sedimentary basins in this country which have been very poorly explored. So we have to now intensify our exploration of our sedimentary basins. Third, that when we do talk about oil and gas, we have to recognize that there is an abundance of gas in India, more so than oil. So we need to ensure that we put in place the infrastructure for bringing gas from the production point to the consumer. Unlike oil, gas is not easy to store, so you have to actually create the pipeline infrastructure in sync with the production of gas, or else you'll end up flaring the gas. But the final point I'd make is, and this is also a short-term point, that you cannot lose sight of the medium and long term. So we have to shift away from fossil fuels. In order to shift away from fossil fuels, we must now invest in the technology for alternatives, renewables.
Well, you know, 3 of them have a direct relevance today, and I think the point that you made is it's a priority today to look and think about the future and prepare for the future as well. Mr. Lango, we've touched upon it briefly, but really, based on your experience, take stock of the reserve potential in India and, you know, be as honest as you possibly can. What are the concerns for any investor in the E&P space, any private investor here in India?
I think before I go to that question, if I may add just one more element to what Vikram said, which is from a present perspective, you know, one thing that gets better every year in our sector is the technology. The technology to both discover oil and gas resources as well as the technology to recover more from the discovered resources. You will be amazed to know that just 1% increase in the world average recovery from the fields already discovered would meet the world demand for more than 1 full year. That is the power of recovery technology as such. In that context, there is a large resource which already has been discovered. How are we developing it? How do we incentivize even the existing player, including the government companies, to recover more out of the discovered resource base as such? That is a very, very important immediate price to be accessed. Discovered, but we all know different fields have a different level of recovery rates.
Sure.
Passed on geology, etc., etc. So that's one part. From an investment perspective, to really attract investment, you know, this is an amazing industry where we don't compete with anyone else. We actually learn from each other. What the companies need is more people to come, and more people, more players will come if the data about basic geological data about this country is out there for the companies to see and take a view about its prospectivity. Unfortunately, today, those data are not available in public domain because they have not been secured using the latest technology. The Geological Survey of India, which was done several decades back, doesn't use the best technology. I would say if there's one thing important for investors apart from pricing part is the data.
On that note, we're going to take a very quick break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Energy Dialogue presented by Cairn India. The institutional mechanisms to address the energy security building blocks that our panel has outlined. I'm going to focus on that, and Mr. Saran, this is coming your way. 2005, the Prime Minister created, the Energy Coordination Committee. Can this be leveraged to bring every government department onto the same page, to bring the states and the center onto the same page? It may not be the only mechanism. If there are any others, please do spell them out.
The states in any case are not part of any coordination mechanism that we have today. So that's a big lacuna in any case. But this so-called coordination committee, if you're asking, has it made any difference? A simple answer to that is no. It has not made any difference because the entire governance structure for energy in India is completely fragmented. And it's not by, bringing the secretary from the different ministries together, say in a meeting by the cabinet secretary, that you are going to get an integrated policy or a coherent policy. What happens in these meetings is that each particular secretary or each particular department comes with its little brief, spells out that brief. We decide, okay, maybe what are the kind of things we can do together, go away, 6 months later you meet again. I mean, that's not the way that you can handle
What then
energy.
is the way?
So you need to have an institutional structure where all these different strands of energy policy, not just coordinated, but you have a certain coherence, policy coherence that you are able to achieve. So you need something like a Department of Energy or a Ministry of Energy, Energy Commission, where all these different strands can be brought together, and you have somebody at the top who can knock heads together and make certain that whether it is inter-se energy pricing, whether it is issues of exploration, whether it is issues of what kind of a regime that you need to put in place, regulatory regime, incentive regime, in order to bring about the kind of exploration, increased production that we are talking about.
I was just going to turn to Mr. Jain to say, really, could the Planning Commission, in some sense, spearhead this? But
to my mind, I think the problem is of not having a coherent policy for energy. Whether the best way to handle that is to have one integrated ministry, I'm not in a position to acknowledge that as yet. Well, we do have successful examples of an integrated Department of Energy in most of the developed world, and probably that is what hints to us that maybe that might work for India. But let us also remember that our per capita energy consumption is just over 500 kilograms of oil equivalent, which is 1/3 of the world average. And under these circumstances, we need heroic efforts to ramp up energy supply and look at the other aspects of energy like energy efficiency, etc., across the board. And for that, you need dedicated attention and all efforts to go into all sectors of energy. So what I might attempt is that if there were a coherent policy, because many times two ministries might work at cross purposes with one another. Now, if renewable energy is to be ramped up, we all know that renewable energy is lumpy, costly in the beginning. In the beginning, you made all the investments in solar panels and the windmills.
Sure.
Later on, there's no raw material supply, raw material costing. So somebody has to fund the setting up, and that could come from, let's say, some other ministry which is cash rich. Energy is spread across not only supplying ministries, but also demanding ministries. You have railways, you have road transport, etc.
And those have to be managed
so
and
it's
weaved
not
in as
possible
well.
to just have one ministry to handle this difficult subject of energy. I think you need a coherent policy framework for that.
Okay, I'm seeking solutions, Mr. Mehta, and let's just take stock of the low-hanging fruit for a moment. So what do you see as the low-hanging fruit, given, all of the challenges that have been articulated?
Look, in 1992, and until 1992, we had a Ministry of Energy. And then in 1992, we dissolved that to create more cabinet posts for the coalition partners and so on.
And that's here to stay, so.
So low-hanging fruit would be, one, to acknowledge that the existing institutional structure of various ministries of energy, coal, power, renewables, petroleum, Planning Commission as a non-executive body will not be easy to dissolve. What, however, we can look at, and that's the low-hanging fruit, are the issues that are falling into the cracks between these various ministries. And there are many issues that fall into the cracks that no one is handling. For instance, the environmental impact of energy, issues regarding our international strategy for acquisition of assets, the issue of regulation. There are so many different regulators. There's a State Electricity Commission, there's a Central Electricity Reform, there's a Petroleum Regulatory Board. Regulation is also falling into the cracks. So the low-hanging fruit could be to create a Department of Energy in the Prime Minister's office,
which looks at everything that's
vested with executive authority. Very important word, executive authority. There is no one entity that has executive authority over energy in this country today. Department of Energy in the PM's office, vested with executive authority to focus initially on all the issues that are falling into the cracks between these existing ministries.
Well put. We're talking about, in this seeking solution spirit, we're talking about low-hanging fruit. And, from your perspective, does ramping up technology, really ramping up the talent piece of the puzzle, would you consider that low-hanging fruit in terms of solutions?
Three things. Number one is to really ensure that whatever domestic production that can occur, which is whether oil or gas, should be allowed to be produced without any controls as such. Recognizing the fact that you are importing oil at $100 per barrel, no domestic production is going to cost you more than that. So that's number one. Second is, from a larger perspective, that I would promote substitution of gas to oil. I will promote a gas economy in this country because even if we continue to import hydrocarbon molecules, I would rather import them through gas and LNG rather than in oil barrels. By doing that, I believe we could save 1/3 of our import bill by just substituting the oil to gas. Third and finally, it is about the country recognizing the transformation potential of this sector. I think the biggest issue is people don't understand how much it can transform this country if we are successful. And I'm not saying for a moment at every endeavor we would be successful, but you're not going to be successful if you're not going to try it out. So to do that, certainly you would look upon the talent piece, and it's amazing around the world. Senior technical positions are held by Indians, and you have in our own country several institutes producing very top quality talent, but they don't really understand about this sector. So one of the reasons for running a program like Amazing Champions of Energy by Cairn is really with the view that let these our young talent understand the sector and its potential and what role they can play. And at the end of the day, not only this business, every business is about people.
We'll pick up all the threads after this quick break, summarize some of the approaches and solutions outlined by the panel. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Energy Dialogue presented by Cairn India. Geopolitics goes hand in hand with energy. When we talk about energy, we have to look at the geopolitical implications. As demand shifts consistently towards this part of the world, and I mean the East, there are implications on the geopolitical landscape. Mr. Mehta, what are you watching for as this demand further and further shifts to the East?
From a geopolitical standpoint, clearly the Middle East has been in turmoil. So Iran has been sanctioned, Iraq is not producing to its full capacity, Libya is also not producing, Syria is in a civil war, and you continually question the durability of the Gulf Gulf states. So there is that concern that every oil importing country must have as to what will be the supply out of the Middle East. That said, there's been a lot of new discoveries. The most revolutionary and dramatic of all those discoveries is, of course, the shale revolution in the US. And today, the United States is the largest producer of liquids in the world. That is, you know, if you include the liquids produced from the refineries and so on. So it's really quite dramatic as to how the shale gas and tight oil revolution has transformed the United States' dependence on the international petroleum market. That in turn has, of course, compelled many of the oil exporting countries to look east, rather look towards Asia. In addition, of course, there have been discoveries in Brazil, in Mozambique, and so country like India has to look at it from one perspective, and that is there's an abundance of oil and gas in the world. It is not as if they're going to depend only on the Middle East. They can go to Africa, they can go to Latin America, and indeed to countries like Australia. The issue is how do you secure those resources in a reliable way. And so there's a need today for, if I may, having diplomats actually acting also as energy specialists. And I know that the Ministry of External Affairs, I think, is thinking along those lines.
But you have an energy security division in the Ministry of External Affairs.
Yeah, there is.
How do you really strengthen and sort of, revamp the role of that division?
Well, if you look at the last several years in terms of some of these new regions where energy supplies are likely to become available, Indian diplomatic missions, Indian diplomats have played a very important role in securing long-term agreements with those governments for the supply of oil and gas. So today, I mean, the Ministry of External Affairs is not just looking at political relations. In fact, performance of our diplomats is very much judged by what they are able to achieve in terms of contributing to our economic diplomacy, to our energy security. So that's an important aspect. But just to pick up on the geopolitical change that Vikram mentioned, I think for India it becomes very important that you try to take advantage of the opportunity that is offered for diversifying your sources of supply. So there is a lot in terms of an agenda. I think there is a great deal that needs to be done precisely because of the geopolitical changes that you are talking about.
And at the same time, there is a chance to sort of learn as well. Am I simplifying it too much by saying, can we draw on what this country has done, that country has done, and apply it in the Indian context, Mr. Jain?
Yeah, to go back to the basic topic which you have just raised of the shifting energy dynamics to the east, to the Asia Pacific. Let me add one or two aspects to it. One is that this shift in the trend is just oil-centric. It's, if you notice that the OECD countries for the last 5 years, 4 out of these 5 years, their oil consumption as a block has been receding. They are on a negative path. So the entire demand is now coming from the east. And one of the lessons which India learns is, of course, to leverage our buying position to get long-term contracts of oil, to diversify bases.
Absolutely.
But the second, I think, aspect which is very important, which India needs to leverage, is to assume a more important position in the global energy architecture. Whatever global bodies that exist, be it the IMF, which deals with the oil aspect, be it the IEA, be it the IEF, be it the OPEC, India, I think, should now assume a more important position. Rightly so, it's its responsibility because it's now a major energy user, and also leverage the authority which it commands in the energy markets.
That's an interesting point. But I'm going to look at this, Mr. Elanga, from the flip side, which is that in light of the geopolitical situation that is emerging, it is equally important to keep an eye on the ball, which is domestic exploration and production. Just distill everything that we've covered into the here and now energy security solution that you would prescribe?
The here and now solution is, there was an interesting saying that we didn't finish Stone Age because we ran out of stone. The oil age is not going to end because we are going to run out of oil. So oil is here to stay as an important fuel for this country. My single point recommendation would be, how do you generate more investment within the country? And while looking at opportunities outside India, today the view is the government support goes to the public sector companies. I think we should stop drawing a distinction between private and public sector companies when it's about securing energy for this country.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights and for your time. I'm glad to know that although a daunting challenge for India, some of the solutions that have been presented address the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to the audience for joining us.